recording. So I will record.
And I'll video out.
Okay. Okay. See some more coming on. Okay, so I just want to say thank you, first of all, to everyone who agreed to be on our panel, Scott, Liliana, and Sarah, and to Anne, my co-partner in crime in this event. And really, I've been wanting to do this for for a few months now. It just became so apparent that as this pandemic evolved, that there was something that we could see that the three principles has offered us in terms of an understanding during this pandemic that seemed to be missing from the conversation wherever I looked. And so it just felt right to see from this perspective of the three principles if there was something else to understand about what was playing out in front of us with this pandemic, and if there was something else to understand about health that we weren't hearing in many places. I mean, certainly not in the mass media, but in other places too, in the three principles community. And this is what I hope this this webinar will explore, and hopefully maybe we'll be in a place of more questions, but rather than a definite certainty about this being, you know, the worst health disaster of our lifetime, you know, even moving to a place of let me wonder a little bit about what's exactly going on, I think could be an interesting place to be. But you may see something new and something completely mind-blowing, hopefully, from some of the things that we're going to share, and that would be wonderful too. So what's going to happen today is that Anne is going to lead us in a little exercise to bring us into a nice space from which to continue our discussion. And then I will share for 20 minutes, and then Scott, then Liliana, and then Sarah. And we'll each share for 20 minutes. I'll put on a little timer that, you know, will just won't mean you have to stop mid-sentence, but, you know, just so that we're more or less keeping to time. And then after the whole panel has shared, then we're going to have a 15-minute break. And then we're going to come back and we'll have an hour and 15 for discussion. So that's where it's going to look. That's what's on the agenda. So I hand over to Anne, and perhaps, well, I don't know what each person on the panel is going to share, but if you just start with a sentence. I mean, I know we've had your bios up on the sign up page, but just a sentence or two about where you're coming from and what brings you to this conversation, apart from me, of course, asking you to join. So that would be great. So over to you, Anne. Thank you.
Okay, so in case, for the people who don't know me, which I think is a lot of people, I trained as a medical doctor, and immediately I finished my training. When I got qualified, I was like, what was that all about? It's something is big is missing. So I realized that there was so much influence on health from relationships and emotions and energy, but I had no idea where to go to get that stuff. And it took me another 4 or 5, 6 years before I actually came across psychosexual medicine, did another 4 years of training in psychosexual medicine and then in psychotherapy, because I was finding some people were getting amazingly better in no time at all, and other people were still struggling, and I had no idea what was going on. So I then spent the rest, well, years and years and years still looking for what was the answer, what really was it I was looking for, and didn't find it, in fact. So feeling pressurized as a doctor, as a medical doctor, and as a therapist, but particularly as a medical doctor, to do things that I didn't think were good for my patients, and to not be able to do things that were good for them, that I thought, I finally packed it in. And it wasn't until, that was in 2009, and I didn't come across the three principles understanding until 2014. So that's another long story. But so my understanding now has developed since then. And so what I'm going to share with you now, this little exercise, is what really helps me to remember who I am and what's really going on. And it may not suit everyone, but we just thought it would be a good way of, as Tanya said, of getting into a nice energy. So what I'm going to suggest is that you close your eyes to do this, and you can always turn off your camera if you don't want to be seen, as you always can, and you don't have to do any of it. But so what I'm going to suggest to begin with is that you imagine or pretend that the physical world, the planet that we live on, and all the people on the planet have dissolved away, disappeared. And when that's happened, that you notice, are you still here? Now that the planet's gone and all the other people, are you still here? And I'm assuming, if you're hearing my voice, that you are. What I would like to suggest now is that you imagine or pretend that your physical body also has disappeared, so that you're just left hanging in space. And that you notice that you are still here. And now that you're here, hanging in space with no body, I'm going to ask you to pretend or to imagine that everything else physical, the universe, the stars, the moon, the sun, whatever else you're aware of physically, also disappears. So that now all that's left is infinite void, infinite space, infinite something. And if you can notice that you're still here in this infinite space, can you also notice where in this infinite space you end? Can you find a place anywhere where you end? Now I'm going to assume for now that you can't. I'm going to assume that you have noticed that you don't end, that you are infinite, that you are that infinite space. And if you have noticed that, maybe you can also notice where in this infinite space do you notice thought? And is there an end to that? Is it in a particular place? Is there an end to it? Or is that infinite too? And also consciousness, to be aware of this infinite space, there is consciousness. So where in the infinite space is consciousness? Is that separate, different, or is that just another word for the infinite space? And the way that I have experienced it myself, and you may be experiencing it differently, but the way I've experienced it is that, as Sydney Banks said, mind, the infinite space mind, and thought and consciousness are all one thing, are all infinite. And in the human experience, then, we use them and we experience them in different ways. So what I'm going to suggest now is that we start and bring things back. So if we start to bring back the last thing that we brought, the last thing that we got rid of, which was everything else, the universes and the stars and the moon and so on. If we bring those back, you'll notice that we're bringing them back simply through the power of thought. And we're bringing them back inside of you, because you are the infinite space, the infinite energy, whatever you want to call it. We're bringing those things back inside of you. We're creating them inside of you. And in the same way, we're now going to bring back the human body. The human body is coming back through the power of thought. We're creating it through the power of thought now, and inside of you, inside of this infinite space. So the human body that we identify with as ourselves very often is only part of what we are. And now you're going to bring back the physical world. And bringing back the physical world also through the power of thought and inside of you with all the other human beings. So we've just gone through this quite quickly, and you may see things differently, but for me, it helps me to get a perspective on what's going on when there seems to be really big events going on in the world, really interesting things going on, what seems to be real in this physical world. So I'm going to invite you to open your eyes again, and you can always contact me afterwards with questions or comments or whatever you'd like. And that's not what the whole event is going to be about, but it's my perspective on where we start out. So do you have any comments on that now, Tanya, or are we going to hand over to someone?
Thank you. But Anne and I discussed that in one of our many pre-webinar calls, and I was like, oh, I think that idea is so perfect for what seems to have happened in this pandemic. I mean, to readjust what seems to have happened in this pandemic, that we've kind of forgotten this infinite space and the connectedness that we exist in, and we've become very much about fear about my body, another body, anyone's body who I might meet on the street, and this sort of sense of there's this transmission of sickness that can pass between bodies, and this idea of infinite and infinite intelligence is what has kept me curious in this pandemic, to see something else. So I'm going to move to what I'd like to share now for my 20 minutes. So thanks, Anne. So for those who, I'm going to put on my timer. For those who don't know me, I have been in the Three Principles world for about 5.5 years. And I work mostly with women at midlife, during perimenopause and menopause, but not only. And what was fascinating right at the beginning of my journey with this understanding is that through insight alone, I was able to cure a whole range of emotional and physical symptoms that traditionally, in the understanding that is dominant in society, are attributed to hormones. to some kind of hormone malfunction. And through insight alone, and the insight was, I don't have to take my thinking seriously, as simple as that, my symptoms disappeared within days. So those were emotional and physical symptoms. And from that, my understanding has grown over the years, and I now share what I see in different ways. But right at the beginning, so also to say, I live in Israel, so although I'm originally from the UK, but in Israel, we've had a different experience of this pandemic than I know from in the UK and in the US. Our numbers are certainly smaller than in other countries. But we locked down very early, and we're now back at a time where people are back to hysteria of the second wave. And right from the beginning of lockdown, I felt that there was something peculiar going on, and in particular, there was a big question mark regarding my in-laws. I live in a sort of intergenerational setup. And although my in-laws, they live above us and we live below, but my father-in-law, for example, works with my husband. And right from the beginning, we were told you can't let the elders out, right? You need to lock them down, particularly. And it was very scary. And we said, because my father-in-law he's in his mid-80s, he goes to work every day. And we said, you can't, you have to stay at home. And my mother-in-law, she's a bit less active, so it was less of a problem for her, perhaps, but certainly for him, it was very strange for him. And he managed to stay at home for about 2 days. And then he's like, okay, I get it, I'm going back to work. And in Israel, like the way that he works, he could go back to work. There was no rule on 80-something-year-olds to be locked down, but he could go back to work because of the way that people could be set up. And he's like, and my husband and I were both in this question of, well, what should we do? Because everywhere we're hearing, this is scary, and especially for older people, and especially, they must stay at home and they must stay away from people. And we both saw that we were making a decision. If we were going to force him to be locked down, we were making a decision from fear and not from love. And we both know that him being an active person in his mid-80s, being at home, not going to work, would literally be very, very bad for his health. And he knew that too, which is why, even though the news was full of, 80-something-year-old, 90-something-year-old dying, he was like, it's fine. Right? It's fine. I'm going back to work. So this set me on a path, because I was like, well, this is so strange, because I teach this stuff about there's nothing in fear for us to there's nothing there for us, right? That and we know that feeling of constriction and fear. So why would we be making this decision from fear for my father-in-law? And like I said, my husband and I were both really aware of it. We're like, well, we never want to be making decisions fear. So I guess this one we're also not going to be making from fear. And we, during the early time, we definitely sort of kept our distance and tried to get him to keep his distance. And we were like, oh, you mustn't go to the supermarket. I'll do the supermarket shopping for you. And, I did one supermarket shopping for them. And then he was like, okay, I've been to the supermarket, no need, I'm fine. And that's sort of fearless living that he's lived all his life and led him all his life. So how could I come in and say, oh, whatever your innate intelligence is telling you, that can't be right, because I have this fearful thought that I'm getting from the media that you need to stay at home. So this set me on a journey. Well, could it be okay for him to be out there? Could it be okay for all of us to be out there? And what exactly is this virus? Like this, because this also didn't make sense in my work. In my work, I work very much from the sense of allowing people to relax into the brilliance of their body. And from there, seeing that healing just takes place. Right? When we take ourselves, however we want to describe ourselves, sort of more out the picture and relax back into that intelligence, amazing things can happen. So if I, all the time, again, I'm sharing this idea of an infinite intelligence, of innate intelligence. Listening to all this story about the virus seemed to suggest that there was a limit to intelligence, that the body's intelligence hit up against a virus, and that was it. So I wanted to know, well, could that be true? Because it didn't seem to make sense from everything else that I had experienced in my work and in my own personal, since, understanding the principles. Now, one of the symptoms that I had cleared up through Insight Alone, that I had been experiencing lots of symptoms in my perimenopause years of, night sweats and very, severe mood swings and anxious thinking and migraines and all kinds of things. But one of the things that I had also cleared up through Insight was eczema on my hands, which I'd been experiencing for a few years in perimenopause. I knew that eczema was caused by certain soaps that I was using. So for this house, they had this terrible, didn't look very toxic, but very, very toxic. When I'd go to restaurants, remember those days, when I went to restaurants or any other sort of, public place or a friend's house and washed my hands, then my hands would sort of like, become inflamed and I would have some kind of eczema. But at home with, the natural soaps I had at home, that sort of kept it in check. So when I had my Insight, what was so interesting is, the other symptoms you could say, well, I don't know how you could describe them, if you don't want to use the hormones, but you could maybe look at a different way to describe them. But then here was like something very external. It was like this toxic soap that no longer had an impact on my hands. It no longer affected my hands, but the soaps hadn't changed, right? The soaps were still as toxic. My parents still had the same brand of soap, and yet it was no longer affecting my hands. And that change happened from Insight Alone. So the way I understood it is, when I was living a life of stress and in misunderstanding, my body couldn't work as it was supposed to work. It couldn't detoxify. And I see that to this idea of when we meet illness, and I'm not really sure that we meet illness in the way that we think that we meet illness, but let's say when we meet illness, right, it's our bodies all the time going through detoxification, going through regeneration. And just as me with toxic soaps, my body couldn't handle them, and one day my body could. This appears to me to be possible in any situation, in anything that we use. So I started exploring, what is a virus? Like, could a virus be something that behaves like the soap? That, if I'm in a, it's just not going to have an impact, and if I'm in an unhealthy place, it is going to have an impact. And there is that. But there's also a question of, well, does the virus come from outside? Is this whole idea of we transmit disease even true? Which is kind of mind-blowing, since this is the way most of us have probably been brought up to think. There's a sick person, stay away, you can catch their virus, you can catch. It was fascinating to discover that no one has ever proved that you can transmit the virus in the way that we think it's been through aerosols and droplets, etc. So we have this theory of viruses and disease keep us in fear of our own body's brilliance. And it stops us from trusting in the innate intelligence of our bodies to detoxify when they need to detoxify, and to work in ways that we can't possibly imagine, right? Because the intelligence is so huge, right? So this whole notion of, I need to live in fear of my body of any symptoms that occur in my body, of anyone else's body, right? Going back again to, is there ever anything for me to search and fear, right? That didn't make sense either, right? If I'm saying, oops, Anne, can you just, if I'm saying that there's never something for us to search and fear, then how can we, in terms of fearing others, right? And what if health was more about something that could be transmitted, that health could be transmitted? Hold on. Okay, thanks, Anne. So this has taken me on this journey over the last few months, discovering that view of germ theory, that there's just such a huge consensus around it and such a huge science that's grown out of it. But what happens if that is just not true? What happens if there aren't viruses that are passed between each other? What if viruses just in our body, as we know they exist in the soil, as we know they exist in the air and in the sea? What if we create viruses when there's some cleanup work to do? The stress, through a toxic stress or through an emotional stress. And looking at those ideas that, oh, what if viruses are part of the intelligence, just fits better with everything else that I've seen about innate health, right? Rather than living my life in fear of something out there, right? If I can live my life in love of what's inside, of trust of what's inside, and a trust that I am connected in such a magnificent way to everything out there, that rather than viruses are an exchange of disease, that viruses are an exchange of information that can be crucial and are a part of our health. And I was already familiar with the microbiome for a number of years, and so also if you have an understanding, even a small understanding of, our bodies are full of viruses, our bodies are full of bacteria, our bodies are full of fungi. Like, where did this idea come from? That, oh, my bodies are full of viruses, but then one virus is going to come from outside, right? So what if viruses that we have grown up to fear, that we've grown up to think, we need to be vaccinated against them, what if they're part of the intelligence? What if they have a role to play? But if we ignore the that that our body sends us through symptoms, then dis-ease is also part of the intelligence and bring us back into balance, right? We get, often before disease, we get signs. Just like if you ever remember having the flu, right? The flu doesn't normally just come out of nowhere when you're in your best state, on holiday, on the beach, right? And feeling wonderful. And then, you wake up with the flu, right? We've all been in a situation where we've overworked, not slept enough, not been eating perhaps as well. And then maybe we come down with, right? Maybe there were little signs that we ignore first, like the little headache, like the little rash, maybe it was like the little signs. Those signs are our bodies speaking to us. And then if we don't listen to those signs, if we think, oh, I am tired, but I'll have another cup of coffee. Oh, I am, eating crap, but, never mind. Oh, I am, working too much, but, oh, yeah, I've got a really bad headache from it, but I'll just take, some pill, right? Then maybe what we call a virus just comes to wake us up when we've been asleep. So this understanding that can help us see, what I would say is like an expansion of this understanding of innate health, right? Because in the principles, we talk of innate health, and from the beginning, I've often wondered, the term mind is kind of deceptive. I'll use it within the three principles community, to talk about innate intelligence, but then we think it's up there, right? And then we use these examples of the flower blooming and the tree growing and the acorn and we use those examples when actually the intelligence is all through us all of the time. It never leaves us. Even when we're experiencing symptoms of a virus, that exists within the intelligence. It's impossible for us to step out of that. It's impossible for us to, excrete the intelligence, right? It just is. And it's all around us. And so this sense that there's something that's going to break through and it's going to be beyond the intelligence, right? That just no longer makes any sense to me. And that's really why I wanted more within this understanding, because I think that the principles offer such a foundation, but that often we sort of take the body out of the picture, because often we think, well, the body must be real, it's saying, it must be real. And I know from my work with women, even having discussions with three principles of community, people are something, yeah, but our hormones, right, that's real, right? Because I can feel that, so that's real. That's almost then beyond the intelligence. But there's no part of us beyond the intelligence. So if someone can do a test and they find something in us, it's part of the intelligence. And if we ignore the signs and we forget that innate health is always okay, right, then the body's just going to send us bigger and bigger signs. And that creates disease. But even that is part of the intelligence. So I think I'm coming up to my time, and I will leave that there and hope that that's a good opening on which to move forward. So, Scott, I hand the mic over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. That was really, really, really wonderful. And I love your perspective and the depth that you've chosen to see into this, because I hope you all can hear me okay. If you can't, just kind of wave. Okay, good. So first of all, thank you, Anne, and thank you, Tanya, for providing this opportunity and platform for us all to explore. Because I think in my lifetime, which has been so long, I've never seen or experienced anything like this. And before I dive in, my background began 25 years ago in the world of physical therapy, and my own curiosity kind of brought me from the caboose of the train into kind of the train. And what I mean by that is I looked at everything as a physical, mechanical thing that needed to be fixed if it were broken. And from that understanding, slowly migrated into the world of nutrition and started to see the impact of nutrition on overall health and well-being, and from there started to migrate into the world of the psychological, and started to see that there was a way in which our own mental and emotional awareness and understanding played a significant role in our physical health. And when I got really kind of spun out in my own life, it was the intelligence of life that rear-ended me and kind of shook me up for a moment and helped me realize that I was okay, even in the tailspin. And from that moment in time, I saw profound impact in my own health and my own just kind of perspective about life. And it shifted everything about how I worked with people. And so as we've been invited really by this virus, it's really, I think for so many of us around the globe, it's been an opportunity for us to look at this from a place of understanding, or take an invitation into something, or to look at it from our own personal constructs about life. And what's so fascinating is that when we choose to look at something from our own concepts and constructs about life, we oftentimes miss the invitation into possibility, and we miss the invitation into the intelligence itself. And so in a way, throughout this process over the last several months, I feel like we've been given this unbelievable invitation as a planet, as a species. And in some ways, we've chosen to look for the answers in germs and bacteria and viruses. And in a way, looking for answers in germs, bacteria, and viruses is a little bit like looking for answers in fear. It doesn't really compute, you know. And so what is the invitation? And you know, I love what Tanya was saying, because the reality of it is, one of the things that is so remarkable that has come into an understanding in the medical community more and more over the last 5 years, really, is the fact that the body is bacteria. The body is a microbiome. The body is far more bacteria and viruses and parasite than it is actual cells. And so that was not an understanding that we had, 10 years ago. It was an idea that many, many people had in the natural health community. And it hasn't been until we started to be able to measure that we actually decided that was true. But even so, even though we can measure it and we can see it, we still are constructs about bacteria, germs, and viruses as being an enemy. But what if they weren't such an enemy as they were collaborators in optimal health and well-being? What if they were the guardrails of life that could help us understand are in harmony with nature versus innocently falling out of harmony with nature? What if the germs and the viruses and the bacteria, when they reveal themselves through symptoms, are literally the alarm bells helping us wake up to true possibility and vitality that already exists within our human body? And so that's really what I started to get really curious about. In work that I've been doing for the last several years, I started to see that in every symptom of the body, we're taught that symptoms are enemies. But symptoms actually aren't enemies as much as they are invitations. We see them as inconvenient. And the only reason we would see them as inconvenient is because they take us out of our own rhythm of life. They get in the way of our lifestyle. They get in the way of our ability to do what we like to do. They get in the way of our likes and dislikes. But all of those things are just kind of things that we've made up in our own head because they're convenient for us. And a symptom is really nothing more than the expression of the physical body, also the intelligence of life. And we've made this idea of symptoms or getting sick or getting ill or having health challenges. We've made this idea either good or bad. But ultimately, if we really pull the lens back, it's normal, natural, and biological to actually have an experience on the spectrum. Symptoms come, understanding comes, symptoms go. Symptoms come, understanding comes, symptoms go. And there's a natural dance that we can allow. But if we are taught to fear symptoms, or we hold this idea that symptoms are nothing more than inconvenience, then our first line of defense is to eliminate the symptom before actually getting the invitation. And we eliminate symptoms by moving to a first line of defense that mutes the symptom rather than understanding. And so, in a way, humans, we all, in our own different ways, but also as a species, we've kind of innocently moved into this position of trying to be conductors of a symphony. Nature is this wonderful symphony, and life is behind this wonderful symphony, and humans try to be the conductors of the symphony rather than just being good players and letting nature be the conductor. And if we can do a better job of being good players and listening and watching the conductor, we can find our cues in nature. We can find our cues just by being awake, being alive, and most importantly, being curious outside of our own constructs that we've created around fear and convenience. And so, in our own way, there is a symphony going on within the body, moment to moment. And bacteria, germs, and viruses are all part of that symphony. They're all part of it. And when we simply fall out of harmony through our mental and emotional states, through our lifestyle, through nutrition, through rest, through connection, and through community, when we innocently fall out of harmony, we give the opportunity to bacteria, germs, and virus to pop up and provide us with an awareness. But when we make it the enemy, then we go to antibacterials or antivirals or anti versus curiosity. The thing that's really important to remember is that, yes, we are filled with bacteria, germs, and virus and parasite. That is normal, natural, biological, and by design. I mean, in essence, we are kind of a mirror of the soil of the earth. We are a mirror of nature. And bacteria, germs, and virus are opportunistic. Opportunistic meaning that when they, in a similar way to humans, it's like when they're given an opportunity to kind of take the spotlight of the stage, they'll kind of say, oh, I'm up. And just kind of like humans do when they're given the opportunity to take stage, they'll go, oh, I'm up, instead of realizing that they're just part of the symphony. They're part of the symphony, not the lead of the symphony. And so, the virus is simply opportunistic. We can look to invitation, symptoms being invitation to say, what is the opportunity that I've provided, innocently provided? Is there a way that I can allow myself to slow down to the speed of health, slow down to the speed of nature? One of the things that I think is so fascinating in this time is that the virus has asked us all to slow down. There's a way in which quarantine cannot work at the same speed as, outside of quarantine. People are asked down. In my own household, it's been fascinating to watch. My boys, they sleep more, they rest more. Their level of creativity has come out more in this period. And in essence, they've slowed down to the speed of possibility rather than kind of moving at the speed of reactivity of life. But sometimes we can't even know that until we're given the invitation. One of the challenges, I think, in overall healthcare is that we honor longevity over health and well-being. And we have plenty of evidence of that when we simply look at how we've seen a massive increase of lifespan, but we have not seen an increase of well-being. So in essence, we choose to be enamored with films and allow somebody to live longer, even though they're creased. And the bigger question for us is there an either or is there a yes and? Is there a yes and in that can we actually increase and enjoy longevity with well-being? And if that's the case, is there an intelligence that knows how to do that better than our intellect? We don't have to be so in our cleverness. Is there a way that we can slow down from the intelligence of life so that we can let it lead? When we look at virus, viruses and bacteria, but viruses primarily, they thrive on sick and degenerative tissue. And when we have a rate of degeneration that is greater than regeneration, we've created an environment or have an environment that is opportunistic. And so looking at the invitation, we can look at what are all the ways that nature and vitality are designed not only but also around us. And sometimes we can't hear it from within because we're so busy. But if we can allow ourselves to see it naturally happening all around us, just maybe we get an insight that pops through and allows us to see something in our lifestyle that can be helpful. Something as simple as changing how we choose, changing how we allow ourselves to rest and regenerate. There's a fascinating thing that I think is oftentimes overlooked, and that is that although we have this infinite intelligence from within, there are some things in our physicality that are bound by space and time. And there are laws that we have to be able to acknowledge and follow. And some of them are in and around how we choose to fuel ourselves. And if we take a simple look at just one area of life, how we have kind of come from a misunderstanding and try to outsmart nature, it's looking at the world of nutrition and farming. when we start to recognize that our cleverness over time around farming has completely fed a population of humans denatured food that has no longer the vitality. And when we don't allow ourselves to intake the deep nutrients and the vitality that is normal, natural from the soil itself, then our own vitality levels tend to go down, and our own immune system levels tend to go down, and our own experience of our physicality tend to go down. But when we actually wake up to the fact that nature has provided everything that we need as a human species to survive, but also to thrive, we can begin to choose food and farming techniques that are in harmony with nature. And when we can do that, we then let nature lead. We then let it bolster our immune system. We let it allow the vitality to come through. But when we don't see nutrition as something that is something to pay attention to, we disregard it and we get over-convenienced with our foods. And with our foods being over-convenienced, they tend to be naked and highly processed. And in a really interesting connection, when we eat over-processed foods that are denatured, we have an inflammatory level in our body that begins, or in other words, degeneration becomes greater than regeneration. And when we have that experience from within, we have wonderful virus to. One of the things that we should all and could all recognize is if we pull the lens back, one of the things that we find is that people who are most vulnerable to this virus tend to have lifestyle challenges, underlying health conditions that are all connected to lifestyle challenges, or moving faster than the speed of health, moving faster than the speed of life. And so if we can take the invitation, not only for ourselves, but as an entire species, we can begin to help each other connect at a deeper level, not only within ourselves, with each other, but also with nature itself. So when we can be more inspired by love versus motivated by fear, we can see something more powerful than the reactive nature of going into lockdown. I'd be willing to bet that for all of us, this way of life, this idea that every time a new virus rears its head, that we have to go into lockdown until we can learn to vaccinate it, would be something that nobody would sign up for. But if we could all get quiet in our own experience and begin to see what else could be on offer here, more than reactivity, what is the creative, intelligent way of life that we all have the ability to see if we simply slow down to the invitation? So I've come to the end of my time. Thank you all. And now I shall pass it on to Liliana. Is that right?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you. Liliana.
So, hi everyone. I'm really, really happy to be here. And I've enjoyed everything you said, oh, Tanya and Scott and Anne. It feels like a very special space, and it feels there's something new about this as well that we're exploring together. It's not new, but at the same time it is. So great to be here. Feel very honored. So I'm in London now, but I'm Italian. I've been in London for 32 years. And I'm in North London with my family. and we've been in lockdown, all of us. I've got 3 grown-up sons, and a husband, for probably, I don't know now, 14 weeks, although things are lifting. So my background with regards to health, I don't consider myself an expert, not in a conventional way anyway. And I think not even in an unconventional way. I think my expertise are just like being alive and being aware. So I think we're all experts then. And being given this amazing gift of being alive. And then more recently, the opportunity to look towards that gift more in depth and with more appreciation and understanding. So those are my expertise, maybe. But anyway, I trained 20 years ago. I made the decision to look into the complementary medicine field because we lost in my family, a family member took his own life in prison after years of mental health suffering and addiction. So that kind of shook quite deeply, and having 3 kids and a stepdaughter as well, I thought I've got to, after the shock and the pain, I started to really feel this desire, a deep desire to actively do something about this. So homeopathy had been there for me and my family, my kids. The first 2 kids had also they were little, and it had helped. I saw the results of something that is not supposed to work because it's vibrational, but I saw them and I was drawn to the fact that it was not a material approach. It was something more profound than that. Anyway, that's how I felt. So I trained and I practiced it for 14 years. And alongside that, I complemented that with other things like muscle testing and craniosacral therapy and EFT. And then I picked up many things. I was senior homeopath at Nelson's Homeopathic Pharmacy in London for 9 years. So I learned so much, and I really worked with the body's ability to heal itself and self-adjust. And I worked with that. And I have over the world. And I saw how there is something that we quite our brains around, our intellect around, and yet it is so gentle and impactful. So I loved it, and I kind of there was something though about it that I felt there's something missing, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Throughout these years, or practicing it, and that was my lifestyle. So I didn't know what it was. Something happened after 14, 15 years of practice. Something happened in my life, and it was really tough. And I found myself in a really dark place. I had a mental breakdown. So that was a shock, not just because it was a really dark place and I was completely hopeless. And at one point I thought, even if I had a beautiful family, I was in such darkness, in such fear, that I thought I have to check out because this is too big and too much. And then there was also the shock that everything I had trained in and then everything I learned wasn't quite enough. I didn't understand why something I invested so much passion and love, and that helped so many people and helped me in so many ways, wasn't actually working. So I was kind of thrown out of what I thought I knew and understood. And so I went down badly, and I saw a psychiatrist, first time a doctor in maybe, I don't know, I'd never taken a medicine. I've never, it was my kids, all the vaccination thing, everything was very holistic. And yet that humbled me. That really made me humble. And I had to kind of drop into a place of not knowing and not understanding what it was happening, and just reaching out for something. And so I took medication for a few months, and so the whole thing was deep and short-lived. I that crack, and I was coming back from that humble. I came across the principles, and that was like I kind of saw and understood enough very quickly about the principles. It just made sense very quickly, and it explained what had happened to me, and what that thing that I couldn't quite, I didn't know what it was. It's almost like I was a fraction of an inch away from seeing that all the darkness that I had experienced, suffering that people were having mentally, emotionally, were to do their thinking and their state of mind. It's something so obvious and simple. It just hit me after the breakdown, and everything made sense. More sense than it had ever made in my life, from emotional kind of at a mental emotional level. So I was just so drawn towards the simplicity of it. So the lack of understanding has, and how there is so much evidence of what we're talking about, so much evidence about mind and the fact that we experience our thinking. I was like, because as much as I loved what I'd done before, there were so many interpretations and theories still attached to that, and I loved it, but I was completely taken by the lack of theories, that the understanding. So of course I wanted to know more, and I trained and started to practice it, and I've been actually I found myself in working with inmates, and I've been doing it for 5 years. I've delivered many programs, and I've had amazing, more evidence person that kind of wakes up to this, and the life transforms. There's more evidence, more love, more connection, and my life has been completely taken by this feeling of great gratitude, alongside the humanity experience day to day, which hasn't gone away, but
Oops. Thank you for joining, Jane. Just read your comment. Yeah, it's amazing that we can all come all over the world, and that we're having a sort of similar experience of this extraordinary.
Yes, I'm back.
Hello.
You can tell I don't do this often, can you? Oh my
Lovely
God,
to have you back.
I'm so terribly sorry. I saw something plugged in, but it wasn't the laptop, it was my phone. So I'm sorry. I do apologize.
Go ahead.
Okay, so yes. yeah, so I've been practicing and teaching and offering the 3 principles, and almost entirely teaching the principles instead. And sometimes some of my patients, as a, you know, in the understanding of the principles, and so they stayed. And occasionally I might just give them something because it just comes from that place, that more intuitive place, rather than what I studied or what I knew, the theories. And so I really love the work I'm doing, and I feel really, so COVID. Okay, so my whole family had the symptoms, and it's funny because I organized my husband's 60th birthday. It was on the 15th of February, and loads of people came. It was a beautiful party, and friends from Italy came, and I'm from Lombardy, the epicenter of the whole pandemic in Europe. So my really nice bunch of people came from the epicenter of the pandemic to the party. And of course, I mean, every time we had flus or viruses in the house, the family, or in my clients, my loved ones, I've never been, I don't easily go into fear, because I so appreciate that there is such value in all the symptoms that the body experiences. I really want to listen, deep listen to the body, my own and those I take care of. And so that's how I operate. Even with the kids, you know, I moved away from fearful motherhood, parenting very quickly when I saw beyond, well, you know, the conventional understanding. So so we had the party, and my friends went back, and soon after they went back, they stayed with us in the house, and we hung out. And soon after they went back, they a few of them developed the symptoms, and the pandemic just happened. It started to really, and what I was getting from there was horrific, really, that was happening. And because I have friends and family, and my father is 90, lives there. So I found myself really kind of immersed in that quite quickly. And it was so interesting. And then 3 weeks after they went back, we all developed symptoms, okay? And my sons had a fairly mild form of those symptoms. I had a medium, but my husband went down badly. I've been with this guy for 32 years. I've never seen him feeling so sick, ever. For him, it lasted 3 weeks. And the central week, the middle week, was scary, okay? So I started off my usual kind of approach to everything. And I supported everyone, I supported myself, but I was picking up things that were not familiar. And I was trying to place them where I could understand them, in my understanding of, you know, illness and viruses and the body, but I couldn't. They had a kind of to me, it felt different and new. And that doesn't mean that it is new. I'm happy to say, to you know, I'm open to think that it's been around for thousands of years. But to me, it felt new. I did not understand the symptoms. And if I looked at them from a homeopathic point of view, I couldn't quite place them, couldn't quite fine tune to the remedy. If I looked at it from a more physiological, but from a toxicity point of view, I was confused. And so what did I do? Well, most of us do when we are confused. I looked for answers outside myself, out there. And if you have tried to understand the pandemic out there, it's a jungle of theories, more or less plausible. And some of them were plausible, but even the ones that were like, they were just weaved into the confusion of it all, and the fear of it all, and the uncertainty of it all. So I kind of hang out a bit, and then I had people sending me all sorts of things. I was inundated by, this and that, and, all from all directions. And then I thought, so the more I did that, the more scared I became. And I know how it works, but I'm just human. So you see how my breakdown made me humble. This has made me humble again. And it made me stop and say, you don't know anything. This sounds good, that sounds good, but at the end of the day, it's still a theory. And you know full well that there's nothing more amazing and beautiful than just look at what is true, universally true, everyone, and so I kind of stepped back. I remember when I thought, oh my God, look what you're doing, this is not helpful. So I kind of came back and I got peaceful again. And I was taking care of my husband, and it really looked bad. And but I was so present. I was so switched on. I knew what to do. And when you're kind of present and you're like in the zone. And I remember speaking with the doctor, because you call and you let them know, and he doesn't have my understanding, and I kept checking in with him. What do you want to do? What, how would you feel like you should be doing? Do you want to go? And so I spoke to the doctor, and she said, it sounds really bad, but it sounds like you know what you're doing, so perhaps it's best if you keep him at home. And I wanted to keep him at home. And she said, but don't even bother with 999 if it gets bad with the breathing. Put him in the car and drop him at A&E and leave him there. And in that moment, I was sitting on the bed, I was looking at him, and his breathing wasn't good. And he had like fever, 103 for a week, and it just wasn't going down. Terrible pains everywhere, headaches. And within a minute, I went down the rabbit hole of that thought, and I thought, I could lose him. He could die. And within a minute, I was a widow. I had all the details of what that would look like. Even crazy details, like we go to a beautiful little cinema where we get a two-seater sofa and we watch movies together once a week. And I started to sob because I wouldn't be able to do that again. And I imagined the funeral, and then I couldn't give it because he's Jamaican and he loves the, Jamaican funerals are parties. So that made me cry even more. That was, I think, kid you not, was 1 minute. I was in that reality and I was gone. And then something happened, and I felt I was pulled out. by that darkness by something, and that something was the little understanding I have about how we create our reality through thought, and the appreciation I have for how everything is perfect exactly as it is, always, regardless. And I came back. But it was incredible because I came back, I saw myself coming back, and I thought, in my past, I could have just hung out there, I don't know how long for, you know, in what might have happened, or what I didn't do, or what I wasn't doing, or, you know, but not present. So I felt so grateful that I could just come back and be there, present, and have a sense of what to do. So I spent the night watching him, but I wasn't scared. And then I had something silly, you know, and mind works in mysterious ways, doesn't it? But I remember thinking, something came to me, and it was like, go into the loft. And it's not easy to access my loft, and it's full of junk. But I thought, I must go to the loft and get the ultrasound vaporizer. I know, this is like basic, isn't it? And I brought it down, and I put it next to him, and I put some frankincense oil, which I love frankincense, and, you know, all the little things that usually I would have thought about. But, you know, when you're busy and you're scared, and, you know, and then I just put it next to him, and I don't know, his breathing just improved. And it turned the corner that night. So I wanted to share this because the gift for me was to, I felt the humility, not that yes, I felt a new sense of, like, I don't know as much as I thought I did, and I got really humble, and suddenly there was this space where I could just be, and just maybe see a simple thing, or be connected and loving and humble. Sorry, I'm using this word, but I spent my life thinking, and I knew I kind of figured it out somehow, this holistic thing. But it turns out that I didn't. And then I had another insight that was a big gift. It's like, these ease and ease are both part of mind, aren't they? And so is understanding and misunderstanding, understanding and the lack of understanding. So I have the sense that there's much less that we need to do to work it out. And that, in a funny sort of way, in my curious, inquisitive mind, that it goes kind of against it. But then I have a sense of where to look, and what to listen to, and when to listen to it, and what to reach out for, and, you know, and it's very basic and simple, but it's so profound and helpful, that especially through this, this is no exception. The more complicated life gets, the more confused that we get about the direction and the choices, and the more we need to be in a very basic, spacious, simple, you know, empty space, and it's not what I thought. Even through my 20 years of holistic, you know, I was gathering information, gathering things and opinions and judgments and, you know, how-tos, and instead this made me just drop back into basic. And I think my time is up, but thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Amazing. Thank you. Okay, holding the mic over, passing it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Tanya. Wow, thank you, everybody. And for setting the stage on infinite consciousness. Tanya for sharing her whole feeling around what constriction and fear can do to our reality, and when we see through that, how life-changing that can be for us mentally and physically for our health. And Scott looking at it in a beautiful way, that this is an invitation for us to look at ourselves as a species, and to look at the planet as a whole, what we're doing, how it's a message that we're living in disharmony. And Liliana's very painful but beautiful and very real story about her experience with her husband, and so I you know, I'm very grateful to be rounding this off before we go into questions. And so I kind of, I'd like to set, because there's not a huge million names here, but and something I would just say is that I know there are a lot of people here who are already connected within the three principles, and I'm deliberately going to talk about this in a way that doesn't talk just to that community, because I think the value in what everyone's been talking about should be out there for everybody. So I'm going to talk about my own experience and how the whole mind, body, spirit connection became a huge part of my life from living quite unconsciously until my 30s. And then how I got into a 17-year journey of searching for healing and health empowerment, that I had chronic fatigue syndrome and became very unwell, and I was very fearful of symptoms. Scott put it so beautifully. What I picked up on how Scott talked about it, the shift from me went from one of being fearful of my body being out of control to starting to see my symptoms as neutral, that they were a presentation for me to get back into communication with my body. It wasn't my body working against me. And I think the traditional view of, or the mass view of health and medicine is that we're almost going to battle with our environment all the time, or we're fighting these things, or so everyone who's spoken has set the scene beautifully on I believe how it doesn't work that way. And I started this journey of starting to understand my body better, and understand and not go into fear, because I used to get terrible problems. And very much like Liliana's story, I got so chronically physically and mentally unwell that I was ready to check out on life too. And it was only when I started to just nutrition and detoxing the body, I started to become so interested in that. The traditional medical system was not going to do anything to help heal me. And it's, for me, it feels so unfamiliar to think that now, that anyone else would be responsible for my mental or physical experience except me. And yet, you know, when you look at the messages that are going on right now about the pandemic, how we're being asked to experience it, completely goes against that. And so after many years of working in the naturopathic nutrition and looking at lifestyle factors and a lot of the beautiful things that Scott covered about how we nourish our bodies and about how we look at health and our lifestyle, and how all of I ventured into that. It was like there was a missing piece of the puzzle for me, that I could see I was working with people and they were healing, but it was kind of like they still weren't having a great day-to-day experience of life. They were stressed about a relationship or their work, or they were still stressed about their health, even though they could see their body was healing. So I started to get really curious about what I would term the psychological, spiritual element behind our well-being. And so my work in the last 7 years has completely shifted in that direction. And so probably only about 5% of my work now is focused on what I call the nutrition or the physical. And I believe that shift has kind of reflected our real needs as human beings around what is most healing and what is most helpful. And what I saw is like 5 words, but they're just words. Like, it goes so deep. Is that your consciousness affects your physiology. Your level of awareness around your environment and your body directly affects your physiology. And it cannot be emphasized enough, the importance of how our moment to moment thought and our consciousness is at play when it comes to our health. And I started to notice patterns in my family, and and with clients too. And I started to question whenever I or they got unwell, or you start to notice those symptoms of not being so great. And actually sometimes it can happen, boom, overnight, really quickly. Well, what is that? Like, what's happened before? It's not and kind of the shift. I lived in fear of being near other people who had so much as a sniffle. And I wouldn't go near people, and yet now I am when people say to me, oh, I won't hug you, or I won't because I've got a cold, or I'm like, no, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because my belief system just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't believe that it passes that way. And as Scott said, and Tanya put so beautifully, the terrain within our bodies is everything. Like, if we're in good health, we have, and that shift for me was huge. Who was 4 years to seeing and so for one of the ways that I'd really love all of you to look at this is a wonderful example that Bruce Lipton wrote about, and he was actually a big part of it, osteopathic training. Bruce Lipton's amazing. If you've never read his stuff, he talks very much along. One of the bits he writes about is how it is that adopted children end up with the same so-called inherited diseases as their adopted parents. Okay, why would that be? Is that really down to genes? Is that really down to the medical belief that we're kind of pre-programmed, that certain diseases and certain things are just, it's like it's a pre-written contract. We know with the BRCA breast cancer gene that a lot of people have mastectomies because of it. That there's this fearfulness that it's kind of like a Russian roulette, that you're born and you're given this body, and if you're lucky, if you're lucky, then you've got good genes, and if not, then you're going to be in a really bad state. And when I was chronically ill, I really believed, oh well, I've just been, sorry for the swearing, but I've just been handed a shit show. Like this is due to whatever's been handed down to me. There's a real sense of disempowerment around that. But when we look at this again about adopted children and how they can inherit their adopted parents' dis-ease picture, like what can we learn about that endemic? And that is that thoughts and emotions affect you physically, that genes do not predestine your health, that it is the consciousness and the thought reality that we live in that affects what goes on in our cells. I think about it, and I think about how I'll give a personal experience that in my father's side of the family, there's been a history of heart disease, and I think about why that might be, and not in terms of, oh well, that's just what's handed down, like a weakness around the heart is just handed down. Well, it's like, well, there's a hormone called oxytocin that we release when we hug each other. Like it's the natural love drug that we all get exposed to when we orgasm, when mums breastfeed, even when women give birth. Sometimes when it's a healthy chemical reaction of connection, and so if you're living a life where you feel your thought reality is one of disconnection, then that's going to show up physically in your body. We know, like we know that if you think about it, every thought that we have creates a chemical reaction within the body. Like there are some really obvious ones, aren't there? Like sexual arousal for people who are very light-skinned, that blush easily, that embarrassed thoughts. So we know that it's like a chemical cocktail within us that's going on. So when we're living in a reality of constantly being bombarded with fear, that becomes our reality of being fearful of, even on the level that we're not so aware of it, but we'll cross the road so that we're not 2 meters near somebody, that the people that we really love, that, like Liliana's beautiful example of her father-in-law, I kind of had the same experience with my parents. My dad is he's 78 and he's in the vulnerable group, and I really respected his wishes, not to hug him. And then we just kind of, that came crashing down. And my goodness, that first hug I gave him after I don't know how many weeks, like you could just feel the chemical goodness within your body as thought was doing its wonderful thing. Like I've never enjoyed a hug so much with my dad as that moment. But it was like, you're not telling me that that's not healing. You're not telling me that that experience of connection and love is not what everyone needs. That this living in fear of everyone being this potential of killing each other by even being within 2 meters of each other, or breathing on each other, or is what's really going on here. It just doesn't make sense to me at all. And again, it takes it, all of this took me back to all of the different people I researched in my training when I was learning about natural health and how the body functions. Was a Japanese scientist called Dr. Emoto, and he wrote a brilliant book called The Hidden Messages in Water. And his 20 years of research looked at how thoughts and intentions impact the physical. And so he tested it on water with crystal formations. And if at some point after this or some other point, if you want to look it up online or buy his book, the water that was subjected to love and high vibration sounds and being talked to and intentions, the resulting crystal formations were so beautiful, really beautiful. And then the ones that have been subjected to the fearful low vibration intentions and speaking were very unpleasant, distorted looking molecular formations. Like it was 20 years of research. It's so impactful. Now, what was even more interesting about his research, and is so relevant to what we're going through right now, is that he took water that was toxic and polluted. And this kind of doesn't give us a get out of jail free card to kill our planet and our environment, and as Scott said, destroy and denature how we grow food and cover it with chemicals. But what he did was he took water that was toxic and polluted, and when he did the same experiment of love and high vibration intention, those really distorted, altered water crystals changed into the more beautiful ones, as if they had come from clean, healthy water. So the consciousness and the thought that we're in is way more powerful than anything external in our environment. Like the power of humans to create their moment-to-moment experience has the ability to strengthen or disempower. Like we have a choice right now on how we address what's going on. But what it does do is it puts us back in the driving seat of our health and our whole moment-to-moment experience. We don't need to look at the outside world to heal or stay healthy. We don't need to look at vaccines. We don't need to look at masks. We don't need to look fearfully at other people or be scared of being out in the beautiful sunshine and the fresh air and taking vitamin D, which is well known to help the immune system. So it's seeing what everyone else here has said, is that health comes from within. It always has and it always will. It's so important for us to see that. Like the pandemic reaction that we're seeing, to me, is a sign of disharmony in the natural laws of the planet and our human experience right now. There has never been a more exciting time to be alive, to actually see the truth of this and what's going on. as Scott said, there's a chance to look at how we're living. As Tanya said, in her experience of menopause, that there's a chance to go inward and look at what it means to us. There's a chance to see how all of the cells in our body are behaving. It goes down to the cells, the person, the planet, the universe. It's all connected. What's true for one of us is true for all of us. It's true for every single one of us. It's the reason that we hear about brilliant writers like Dr. Joe Dispenza and Anita Moorjani, both who have written about their own miraculous experiences of healing without medicine. Like, what did they have in common? What did they have in common in their experiences? Like Anita Moorjani, she was riddled with cancer, and it's interesting. Her story was kind of like there was something in what Liliana said about the healing and not going into fear and how that's not helpful, because Anita writes about it in her book Dying to Be Me, that she was doing all of the things about nutrition and health and it was all working, and then people started to put doubt in her mind, and she started to become fearful again, and then she started to get unwell again, not because she'd stopped doing all those things, but because she started to go into fear again. And then when she had that near-death experience, she saw what we're talking about. Like, you can call this whatever you want, but she saw that there is the power in us. It's not the outside world. The outside world does not have power over us. We're the creator of our experience. And when we see that, that's how the body heals. So she had this miraculous healing where these enormous tumors, very well documented by doctors, healed in a matter of, I think it was 4 days or 2 weeks or something. And she's still with us today and shares those experiences. And Dr. Joe Dispenza is another one. He was in a terrible cycling accident and his whole spine was shattered, and specialists, and they said, you're never going to walk again unless we do this operation. To back out of the whole medical system. And he meditated and visualized, and he healed his body. He completely healed his body. Those are just 2 examples of many of people who have seen that when we're coming from that place of love state, for our body to be resilient, to deal with an environment where we need a strong immune system. And the converse of that, when we're coming from love, is that we have everything we need to heal. We have everything we have to fend off whatever we need to in that moment. And I know from my personal experience that I'm more likely to get ill when I'm not in a great state of mind. Like, if I've had an argument with my husband or the kids, and if it's something that I've read, which doesn't really happen that much anymore, but if I really hold on to that, it's kind of like Liliana's experience of going into fear about her husband dying. I move out of those experiences really quickly. And that's what happens when we understand our experience. Our resilience to bounce back from these experiences in our thought reality is so much more heightened. So I kind of want to round it off there. Back to you, Tanya. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Great way of bringing it all. Actually, Anita Moorjani's story is one that I share so often. And I often tell people, if you're not going to read any book but one, you should read hers. And I sort of see that also as, pure three principles in action, as it were, like just so pure and so extraordinary, this potential for our bodies to heal and to be intelligent, and to bring forth that intelligence within us. So we were going to take a 15-minute break. Maybe we'll take a 10-minute break because we're a bit over time and I want to leave enough time for discussion. So please, just a word of warning, if you're on your phone, do not take it with you to the toilet, because I've experienced that on webinars before, and I've even had to edit out some parts. So stay connected, but don't take your device to the bathroom. And we will come back at, let's just see. So we'll come back exactly on the top of the hour, wherever you are. So that makes it perfect. Okay, so see you. You can turn off your video or whatever and make yourself muted, but we're back in 10 minutes.